Now, Teams wants you to start the recording. It's like, help others catch up, start the recording. All right, it's done. Let me find the agenda. There we go. I think I'm seeing all familiar names and faces. Is there anybody who hasn't been on the call before? Okay, I didn't think so. All right. So one of the things we've talked about the last couple of meetings is just getting more information from Claire Blacketer about what happened with the version 6 of the CDM and some specific information about what they did and how the survey table was developed. We've been sort of playing a little bit of tag with alternating vacation. So she just got back yesterday. So I'm waiting to hear back from her. If I don't hear back from her towards the end of the week, I'll ping her again because I'm sure she has a huge pile of email. So hopefully we'll get that visit set up before the end of the summer yet. One of the other things I wanted to start discussing, I don't know that we need to make a decision on it today, is potentially changing the name of the work group. So as we've been working on the proposal and the vocabulary to define the different types of instruments, we sort of have the standard assessment instrument as the overarching term for survey, and then the two subtypes, the psychometrically validated instruments, and then the other ones whose name is escaping me right now. And so I'm wondering, as part of getting the community on the same page with the vocabulary, if we should consider changing the name of our work group to the standard assessment instrument work group. And again, nobody's going to say all that. So we basically be the SAI work group. And then, get out that it stands for the standard assessment instrument. So I was interested in the group's thoughts about potentially having that name change.
I don't have any objection. Actually, many of the instruments that we're using in AI Ready Survey kind of touches upon those standard well-vetted survey instruments like MOCA, which is Montreal Cognitive Assessment Survey that everyone is using now to assess cognitive level after a brain injury or any of the situation where patients are admitted to rehab facility for after such event. So it kind of coincides really well with the survey concepts that we mapped. And I think there's also many of the social determinants of health survey instruments that are widely being used, prepare and various type of gravity survey instruments. So I think it works well with what we're doing, but so that's my thought.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Stephanie. Thank you. And then if not everybody saw it in the chat, Ben had mentioned maybe just shorting it to standard assessment, which I can see because then we don't have to use the abbreviation, but it's not as long as standard assessment instrument. So I like that. Paper, I don't know if it'd be standardized because do we call it standardized in the document? Should I have written standardized? Oh, Alexander, what did you want to say?
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask a question. I'm in the car right now, so if you can't hear me well, so please tell me.
So far, I can
The
hear you.
first, all right, great. So the first thing is it the most overarching term that we've been using across
Yes.
all of the like ideas and everything? All right,
Yeah.
good. And another question is, so just imagine a random hospital with whatever group of people, physicians, identified their personal type of survey they're going to use for whatever reason. Is it by default something that we can call standardized, or it's not? Or it has to, something has to happen before we actually can say that this one is standardized versus another ones that are not?
No, it's definitely a much more formal definition for the psychometrically validated instruments. When we talk about other things like what's been developed for connected things, it's just basically repeated use of a name instrument where your patient or participant are getting the same questions. You're giving them a standard set of questions and a standard set of responses. And so that's going across a given population or subpopulation is defined for your study. And then people may be reusing those instruments, as well. So it may be for a particular study, or they may get used across studies. But the idea is whatever your study group is all getting a standardized assessment.
But
So it's
Alexander,
not
It makes total.
formalized more than that.
I think Alexander is pointing out uh, area where when the hospital uses certain survey, they're not always using the standardized one, but the one that they've been using within their institution. So that we may be doing work that's overarching, not just standard one, but the ones that people are using within their own institution that which we may have to map. So
And I think that's
Uh,
okay. I still think it fits the definition because it's standard within the institution. Like standard basically just loosely means that everyone's getting the same thing. So if they've modified it or have an in-house version, the idea is that those patients are seeing the same thing so that you can assess those patients the same way. It's not a formal definition of, it's not, again, like a formal standard definition of what you would do for psychometric validated. It basically just means you've created an instrument or modified an instrument that you're giving to your assessment group the same questions with the same answers. And you may create different versions over time and things like that, but it's just the fact that it's repeated. You're not like giving a different instrument every time or every week or whatever. So when we say standard, it's not like an outside validated thing like a psychometrically validated instrument. It just means that within what you're giving to a population, it's the same content.
Nicole, it makes total sense, and I totally understand. Even though it like used or reused across a study or some population of patients, it's already enough to call it standardized within the institution, and I'm fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
Another idea, what I'm thinking of, wouldn't it confuse OMOP users? Because usually what we call standard is actually about OMOP, right? And
Yeah.
actually about standard concepts versus source or non-standard concepts and so on and so forth. I think that for those who are deeply involved in this, that is clear. For those who just like facing the surface, this might be a little bit confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there might be some valid replacement for this specific term? I mean, like not calling it exactly standardized or standard, but maybe there is some synonym for that, or not really?
Yeah, so I think it's like two different questions. So one of the reasons I put this forth as a discussion was just because like if we're trying to initiate language through the proposal, do we want to carry out this language or this terminology throughout? And so that's because a lot of what we've discussed in the past 2 years as part of this process is what's our definition of a survey. And so part of what we've tried to do in the proposal is actually, enumerate that, like, what do we mean when we're talking about a survey? And so that's part of the reason for it. Now, we can leave it at the genetic level. We do have some recognition as a work group calling it survey, and I don't have a problem keeping it that. But I just kind of want, from a sort of a philosophical level, as a group that's trying to put forth this proposal and sort of affect how we think about these instruments and how we're going to incorporate them into OMOP, is there terminology that we want to start integrating into the community so that we're talking about these things in a consistent way, and that we don't, continue to keep having the discussion of what is a survey, because now we've defined that in the proposal. And you made a good point, Piper. We talked about it being published, and that again was sort of loosely meant to mean it's available somewhere in a paper or online or something like that. So that might be something we may want to consider in this next round of edits on the paper, if there's anything else we want to say about that. If it's only used locally and the hospital never does research on it and they don't have it available for other people to look at or evaluate outside of that, then does that, it's still survey, we still want to include it, but do we have to change what we mean by published? But yeah, we're trying to create a vocabulary around what a survey is so that we don't keep having to have that discussion. And so that's part of my motivation for, do we need to change the name of the work group to reflect that?
My 2 cents, I don't know, I think it's a great point, because I think the survey is very misleading, but I guess at this point, I'd be inclined to not spend a lot of time on that. And I think this could be an important discussion to bring up at the meeting in New Jersey. And then hopefully by then we'll have our paper published, so we can then make a slide deck out of that and talk about the different terms and language that's used, right? Yes. Yeah, Ben Hamlin, I don't know if we've included you on the paper. There's a group of folks that mentioned they were interested in working on a paper. And we put together an initial outline, and we're reviewing all of the different terms that are used, the pros, proms. What are some of the other ones? Proms, clinician reported outcomes, CROs, CROMs, pros, proms, measures, tests. There's like a gazillion terms that are used, right?
Yeah, I'm very
So-
interested in getting involved in that. I think you mentioned that to me last year sometime, but I've had some
Yeah.
major changes in my professional life right now, and I'm now stable, and so I'd be happy to contribute to that, certainly.
Perfect. Yes,
Yeah.
I'll loop everyone in.
I have a whole list of those terms, from proms to ClinRose to everything else, that I can certainly pull out of the dust and dust off.
And I think that's fine. We want to subsume them under the standardized. I think you're right. It should be standardized and not standard. But anyhow, that we want to assume, like I said, a significant portion of this 2-year discussion has been what all's included under this. And I think part of getting the proposal out there and changing the name is that we just don't keep having this discussion, that we can say, this is the definition, you probably fit under this, and then let's move forward with what this means in terms of mapping. But I do like your suggestion, Piper. I agree, this is not a decision that needs to be made today. I just wanted to start putting it out there, and it's something we could certainly talk about in October.
Is there a breakout session or a session that this group is sponsoring or participating in at that meeting?
Yes. Yeah, so we've got a 4-hour slot on the work group workshop day. So the goal for that time was to spend sort of the first hour or so, what Piper was just kind of saying, going through the paper and, you know, what we've done with the proposal, and then using the remaining time to either walk through demonstration projects that we've been working on with the new proposal so people can see how we're applying it, and or give people like some examples to work on themselves. So that's still in development, but that's the overall plan. Did I see another question? Eric, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to know if we were to break this into like a subgroup leading up to the meeting in October, how often will we have these meetings?
Yeah, so I mean, these meetings are twice a month. I don't see having another subgroup meeting from this. So it would just, yeah, we'll just talk about these things during these calls. I wouldn't have a subgroup. Some things we do
Okay.
offline, in the sense like, so the next thing on my list is the revised proposal. So I'm going to talk about that for a minute. So like, I'll put that up for comment, and those will be things, you know, we work on asynchronously. But
Mhm.
I don't intend that. If the only thing we might do as we get closer to planning the meeting is maybe have some ad hoc meetings with the vocabulary group. So the way we've set up the workshop is that the vocabulary is going to have their workshop first, because we'll have overlapping people between the two, and then we'll have the survey workshop. And so there may be some things we coordinate with the vocabulary group in terms of the vocabulary portion of this process, and we would potentially have some ad hoc meetings to coordinate that before the workshop.
Okay. Yeah, I believe looking at the proposal next will
Yeah.
be very helpful.
And Eric,
Nicole,
I'm curious. No, go ahead, Alexander.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to comment on this. So Nicole, I think what we also discussed previously is that at some point of time, when we have the process established, we might want to have a sort of like the content type of subgroup or whatever group that is working exactly on going through the content and like discussing this with the vocabulary working group, and then getting back to the anybody who submitted the survey stuff. So not necessarily for whatever the nearest meetings or the meeting in the US, but probably in the future that might be one of the possibilities to split the work, right? Because
Yeah.
I think once we have a lot of content, there's no way we're gonna go through all that on the general
It's gonna be a
meetings, right?
separate, and that kind of goes on the next category about process for proposal review, Alexander. So it's definitely been on my mind, Eric, since your group presented, and Stephanie, and some follow-up discussions with Alexander about, you know, we really don't have a process for this, and this is something we need to coordinate with vocabulary. So we have talked about additional meetings for that process, because yeah, again, it's going to be hard to fit into our regular bi-monthly meetings. So basically, we have these meetings for the regular business of the survey group. We may have some ad hoc meetings for planning workshops, and we're likely, as Alexander just mentioned, to have additional ad hoc meetings or gatherings at when we meet in person to deal with proposals for mapping or adding to vocabulary. Does that about capture it?
Yes, for me.
Yeah.
For my team, Juan and Casey, are you all comprehending that?
I'm sorry, what, Eric?
My team,
Oh,
my team is also on the call, and I was just asking if they understood that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds exciting. But sorry, everybody, I joined a little bit late. Juan Espinoza. I work with Eric and Casey. I'm the PI of the Rising Tide Alliance, and I'm the CRIO at Larry Children's, and I've previously participated in other Odyssey activities.
yeah, I thought that was a new face. I was going to ask you to
Yeah.
introduce yourself when we had a pause.
And you know, I wanted to just jump in and ask Eric, so are there certain topics that you'd be interested in us having breakout discussions about? I mean,
Yes. So for me, I would be really more so interested in like how we actually plan for defining like what we consider as survey-like data. Just as a part of our project that we're working on with the T1D Exchange, which provides this survey-like data to over 65 pediatric endocrinology organizations.
Okay. So
Uh,
you're saying
Go ahead,
a
Piper.
little bit, yeah, a little bit deeper dive into how we're defining surveys and assessments or are you saying more in terms of how we'll represent them in Odyssey?
Yes, like how we'll actually like represent them in Odyssey and the process that it goes through for standardization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was gonna say, so I don't know that you've seen the proposal. Well, I know, yeah, I know the proposal's been, so a lot of this is in the proposal. The deep dive version, and this is one of the things that came back on the feedback for the poster for global. So the recommendations we're making, and everybody who's on this invite will by default get access to the revised proposal, which is the next thing on the list, has sort of the high level. So how you categorize your instrument, and some sort of guideline for sort of decision rules for where instrument falls in, and then suggestions for mapping based on the data that you have. And then, but the actual like ETL examples and how you're applying that, you know, only exists for use cases. So for what you have for the type 1 diabetes, what Stephanie's done, we're doing some ones, I know Piper's been working on one with the proposal. My group's starting to work on one. So we're hoping to have those kind of examples to offer at the workshop, but we're not there yet. So the proposal is sort of high level, but it's definitely feedback that we want. And go ahead, Alexander, because I know you were more entrenched in the type 1 diabetes than part.
Thank you. So what I wanted to add, so we've been doing this work for a couple of years already,
Right.
and we've done a lot. And most of these was the knowledge engineering work, type of work, and methodological work. So how do we represent these things? How do we want to address that type of data? But what is also essential is exactly the use cases. And when we're talking the use cases, it's not just different type of data represented in different ways. These are also the scientific use cases. And what I think would be very important and relevant, and I'm not sure whether we can do it right away or on the US meeting, but that actually has to be part of something that is driving the way that we make this proposal and modify this proposal and then map the data and so on and so forth. But exact scientific clinical use cases. So what research questions are being asked? So, and there is a recommendation, right? Even from like general recommendation of how to drive these. I also like talk to Anna in terms of how we're gonna build this next steps, right? So what the process would be and so on and so forth. And what is still missing is whether we are able to look at what scientific questions are on the table, and then we would again rethink everything, how we're gonna do this knowledge engineering based on the use cases, right? And that would be specifically relevant for Stephanie and Eric and Juan's group, so that you guys would be able to bring the use cases, put them on the table so that you understand what research we're trying to do, right? Because otherwise, there is constant knowledge engineering task, but we have to be use case driven.
Yeah, we definitely, and again, it's definitely an iterative process, and we want to help. One of our goals is then to create resources that other people can use. And so the things, Eric, that your group has been doing, and Stephanie and others, we want to at least have these linked to the wiki or find, or actually have ETLs maybe forked into the wiki or the GitHub so that people can, see some more concrete examples of how this is going. And we're also, I think, going to find out as we work through the recommendations of the proposal what works and what doesn't work. Like, I don't expect this to be the ultimate guide to surveys. I think, this will be an iterative process, and we will learn things and change things as we go through it. So I think that's going to be an important part. And one of the things I did want to mention is I did add as an appendix to this latest version of the proposal, the summary document that Renska's group wrote after they had their Promsathon last spring, and they were more focused on what you were talking about, Alexander, on sort of the scientific end and like what kind of questions are we trying to ask with surveys, and if we use the proposal, the guidelines from the proposal to get the survey data into OMOP, are there things we're missing as far as tools to answer the types of questions we tend to want to answer using surveys? So I think that summary document will also help us think about those questions. And again, what's kind of been discussed so far.
100% agree. And once we have both the data engineering problem and the scientific use cases for one case, right? So that you can connect both problems into the one project, then that would be really something that we're looking for here.
Yeah. So, okay, so sort of on that note, talking about the proposal. So basically, about a month later than I'd hoped to do it, I have finished revising the proposal. It's been revised based on the feedback that has been given since it was released in February, along with some additional discussion from the European symposium. And as I just said, I've also added some things to the appendix. This is not ready for prime time yet. I think it's ready for another round of feedback. Juan, I saw what you put in the list, so definitely looking forward to having your eyes on it, as well as the paper that Piper is leading. And there are also some things that I need to do in terms of, giving specific credit for those who have contributed, and maybe digging in a little bit deeper on the references and suggestions on those when you look at it. I'll appreciate it. So I've sent it out for some friendly review because I cannot freaking look at it anymore, but I want to make sure there's nothing glaringly typo about it. So I'm waiting to hear back on that, and then I plan to send that out this week after I hear back at it. And yeah, so anyhow, that's happening. And then related to that, and again, iterating the proposal, one of the things that has sort of come up is sort of these requests for guidance and feedback and approval on projects, again, from Eric's group and from Stephanie and things. And unlike the CDM work group and the vocabulary group, we haven't really talked about a process for this. We've had you come visit us, and I think you'd sent me an email like, hey, is there anything else we should do? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question because we don't have a process. I think what you gave to us was very helpful, and I think we were able to say, yeah, this is in a good place from that. But I think one of the things, and again, this is not something I expect us to decide today, but sort of, with the group that's here, do we need a process? And I think the answer to that's going to be yes. And then kind of what are the steps? And so I shared out some things from what the CDM work group does, as well as some suggestions that Anna offered relative to what the work group does. And just kind of wanted to see what thoughts were for this process. And also, you know, those of you who may have done it through the CDM work group or through the vocabulary group, kind of your thoughts on what that was like, or things you would like to see the survey group, like what would be helpful to you as part of the process. And as Alexander said, this is likely to be something that is done jointly because there are vocabulary specific pieces and survey group specific pieces. So that will probably, you know, be something that will be added to it. So I'll stop talking now. And I'm interested in seeing what all of you have to say about thoughts on a procedure or process.
Nicole, let me maybe reflect on what is happening in general in the vocabulary working group, and how other areas, which are mostly more straightforward than the survey stuff, are going through the review process. So usually there are the meetings of the vocabulary working group, and people just like propose a topic they're working on, and then they come to the working group and show what they've done, right? And then there is whatever public review and comments and feedback on that. And well, usually people either get some feedback and change things and adjust something that they've done, or they're pushing it to release because, well, usually the working group is a sort of like prime time type of thing when you already know what you're doing because you already had some initial consultations and like whatever internal work with the working group. In terms of survey, there might be a little bit more specific or different because, well, it's not straightforward. It is something where we're still building these conventions, right? And I would expect a little bit more requests and stuff going through this pipe rather than the general vocabulary work. So yeah, but we need to find out the mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks,
But
Alexander.
what do you and other think?
Yeah, so I feel like we need to process. I don't know what like I said, I don't really know what that looks like. I'm going to looking to the other groups for guidance. And I guess for lack of a better word, and maybe you can help with this too, based on your work with the vocabulary group, sort of what authority does the survey group have? Like, is it just a matter of reflecting on guidance? So like somebody says, oh, this is how we want to do it, or this is how we did it, and we would come back and be like, oh no, this is not how you should do it, or this is not following our recommendations, but you certainly don't stop anybody from doing it. So I guess I think to me, part of figuring out the process is also figuring out what our role is as far as supporting the community with it. Piper? Oh, you're muted if you're talking.
Yeah,
There we go.
sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say, Alexander, based on the feedback that we got from the proposal that Nicole submitted, one of the things that I'm working on is I'm just trying to test out some of the proposed approaches using some high volume assessment instruments in our health system. So I'm doing it with like PHQ-9, GAD-7, and then I'm trying to find one or two that currently are not either in LOINC or SNOMED, so we can demonstrate how we would do that.
Yeah, I think that.
And then, yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh no, I was just saying, I think that's going to be really helpful. And you've touched on my item C, which is, at what point are we ready to maybe talk about some of these efforts on the call? But go ahead and finish what you were saying. I'm just excited that you're doing it.
Yeah, no, so I'm not sure for right now, the way I'm doing it is I'm putting it in like a custom vocabulary, but there were some specific use cases that we've talked about within the psychiatry working group. So for example, needing to know who's the respondent, right, on the assessment. Is the patient responding? Is it a self-report? Is it an informant, like a parent who's responding to an assessment instrument of their child? Or you've got a lot of teacher report instruments in mental health. So we're trying to add some of those pieces. And so some additional attributes or features of assessment instruments that Loink and SNOMED currently don't capture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will give us a feel for whether it's feasible or not, right? And then, so there's two parts to that. We have our data obviously coming from the EHR, but then we have to create these additional new vocabulary records to represent the model, right? That it's a teacher report, self-report, parent report, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be helpful to see what we might need to tweak, what works, what doesn't work, and definitely excited to see that. Sorry, go ahead, Alexander.
What I wanted to say is, so Piper, look, I think there are two different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is we're gonna roll out the proposal like sooner or later, and this is pretty much the guide that is based on the currently existing practices, right? So we don't invent anything like totally new. So we just say, okay, we can. This is the understanding. So we expect you to map things. We expect you to map things this way and not that way. And the methods to do that are the following. And what we want to do is to establish the pipe for the content, such as Stephanie's bridge to eye content and diabetes stuff, to go through this pipe and what the process of that would be. What you're talking is also very valuable, but you're talking like the big things that actually change the model, even though we don't have the model at the moment, right? But what you're talking is essentially requires changes and a lot of thinking and a lot of knowledge engineering. And I'm not saying we don't need that, right? We definitely need that. And we need to find a more comprehensive model to represent a lot of this stuff. But this feels to be like the next step, right? And it doesn't mean we shouldn't start doing this at the moment, right? So we can do things in parallel. But I would just suggest we separate this, like the common flow for the trivial content that is not really trivial, but at least we trying to put things in according to the practices and conventions we have been using before. And now we're just like trying to formalize all that. And your work is more the new knowledge generation and knowledge engineering. But we also should do that. I'm not saying it's like we just like forget, put it aside. I'm saying that we really need to do that, but we need to separate these two activities so that people are not confused, because otherwise it's going to be like really complex to follow.
Yeah, I agree. And I hear what you're saying, Alexander. And I kind of think that's go ahead.
And
I was just going to
the process. Sorry.
Oh,
the process for this type of work. Okay, Nicole, let me quickly finish. The process for this kind of work that Piper is doing is totally like on the case-to-case basis, right? We don't really have a process, and maybe we don't even need a process because the big changes like that we don't really do often, right? So that would be rather we're sitting together as a working group, define what we want to change, and then talk to the vocabulary working group. But this is really occasional type of change.
Okay, so I see Eric has his hand raised, so I just want to, I want to give him his time, but I wanted to just jump in really quick and just say quickly. So I absolutely understand what you're saying, Alexander, and I think this is the distinction between the psychometrically validated assessments and the survey assessments. And I agree 100%. some of what I'm talking about really has more to do with re-engineering the vocabulary and the relationships, and that is specifically for psychometrically validated instruments. Probably the higher priority issue for this working group right now is, as you said, really focusing on what is the guidance that we're going to give folks for getting it into Odyssey, and particularly for things that are more survey-like rather than measurement-like. So I hear you. I hear you 100%. Okay, sorry, Eric.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm just gonna take a quick leader privilege and just say, I think too, and unfortunately get into these positions where we want to use the same word in the same way to mean multiple things. So I think partially we're talking about is sort of layers of a thing, right? So they have the overarching high level proposal, then we have use cases, whereas Piper's tends to lead more in the psychometric area, and the things Connect will be doing leave more in the SDCI area. And so it's important to have these use cases and that. And then we also have the process of, what Eric and Stephanie have been working on. They've worked them out for their studies, and they want feedback or approval on the things they either need from the survey group or they need from the vocabulary loop, to wrap this up and get feedback that this is sort of in line with what we're talking about with the guidelines. And so part of the proposal should be some outline of what that process is. Like, how do you present to the community, what the timeline is, what kind of feedback can you expect to get back, what that kind of thing. So we've got sort of we have this high level recommendations, we have our use cases and scientific questions, and then we have the people who are applying those things wanting to come in and present to vocabulary survey, either because they need something or to get feedback on how they're doing it. So that's how I'm seeing sort of our discussion so far. Okay, Eric, go ahead and chime in.
I'm actually glad that you chimed in and said that. So my question to you would be, what exactly would you all need from us as in Leary Children's and the T1D exchange process? What would you all need from us to push that proposal moving forward?
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think we have it. Like the proposal, what you showed in the slideshow, and was it Paulina who was on your team that was also talking about a lot of that? Yeah. So what you did aligns with what our recommendations are. I think, Alexander and I had some discussion about it afterwards, and we can, I don't know if you've gotten feedback from the vocabulary group about it or not, but I think it aligns with what it is we're recommending. But again, it kind of is showed to us we don't have this, like, we don't have we don't have a rubric, right, for evaluating it, or what we need you to put in a proposal. So really, what you've put together is something that we can have as an example to do that. But I certainly wouldn't want our needing to develop this process to hold you back. So, unless, from Alexander's side, there's feedback that would, I think you're good to move forward. And we can talk about it a little bit more offline. I could take another look and see from my discussion with Alexander if there's anything standing out. But I think you're in a good position. But like I said, it's really sort of illuminated for me that, oh yeah, we don't have this. Like, I don't know what to tell Eric. so you guys are sort of guinea pigs. And I know it's not the fun position to be in, but it's helpful, and it's also sort of part of the process of making this better for the community and everybody else who goes after this, and also your future projects. Now okay, we're moving in a good direction with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, if I might summarize, is I think we've provided all the information. The information seems reasonable. Part of this at this point is, how do we have processes around this kind of thing, since this is maybe one of the first times we've done this kind of thing. But it sounds like we might be able to still move forward with adding these terms, and that this will be an experience that informs how others, T1D data spec will be the first one, but it certainly won't be the last one.
Exactly. Yeah. Very succinctly put. Lon, thank you.
Oh, no, I want to make sure that I'm understanding. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah, that's helpful. I do the same thing. I want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
hearing correctly. Yeah, so I think that's definitely where we are with it. And again, it's appreciated. And I think one of the things that might be nice to do, and again, this is maybe a side meeting, is to sit down with your group with the proposal and see, with what you're, how can we iterate what you've done into a set of recommendations for what other groups could possibly do. I think that's something that might be a helpful process for the group. And I know, Stephanie, I want to let you go too, because you've been also in the trenches with the AI Ready, and I'm sure you have some thoughts about your process, and how it's gone for you, and maybe a little bit more needing feedback on the vocabulary side, but what you would want from the survey group.
Yes, we went through years or more worth of cycle of terms that we're capturing through various different survey instruments that we asked participants to provide. And then we ended up trying to map all those survey questions and answers into a concept. And then there were cases where we couldn't find a concept that we could map to. So we ended up creating a custom concept. And so we separated the concept to vision related, vision care related, and then the MoCA related concepts, and just plain survey questions that it could include various different topics. And we proposed the custom concept to OMA Vocabulary Working Group, and they asked us to go through a lot more in details with the vision care group SMEs, as well as the survey group SMEs, which is this group. And then out of that review process, we came about a few questions that is still lingering, and that is, if we use particular instruments to capture retinal imaging data, should we be mapping that in 3 ways? The visit, where that retinal imaging concept or procedure took place, as well as the procedure for the retinal imaging, and then the device that were used to capture those retinal imaging, because sometimes different instruments provide different image aspect ratio, and how you process that through, with various different AI imaging techniques could result in different outcome. So they wanted to capture the details about what device were used for capturing retinal images. So we have the list of instruments that the participants use, and we ended up listing all of those different types and wanted to kind of propose that list as a formal list of vocabulary, so that people could use it to say, oh yes, this device was used for capturing this retinal image measurement. And so now we have a list, and we wanted to kind of review that list with you and see if that three-way mapping would make sense. So we have like a very specific use case that we would like to review with this group. And so vocabulary working group would have a peace of mind that we went through this process with this group, kind of going over that process you've been talking about, and if that would be like a good guinea pig to kind of try out our process.
So, Kit, the only thing is, so I appreciate the guinea pig and trying to figure out some of these things, and I'm sure the vision group does as well. But could you help me tie that back on how recording the information relative to the instrument ties back to the survey portion of it?
There were a list of basically PDF form that was designed through RedCap, and they were asked, for this retinal image, which instrument did you use? And there was a
gotcha.
list of devices that were listed.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
But there's no way to there's no way to map those devices other than very generic level within the current vocabulary. So we wanted to understand how best to capture that.
Okay, that sounds good. Is that something you'd want to walk through with us on the next meeting on August 4th?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good. All right. Yay. Thank you, guinea pigs. Appreciate it. And then I guess we're not quite at time, but we're getting there. So I guess what we should kind of figure out, although I think we've talked about a little bit, are what are next steps. So I would propose spending some time with Eric and team and kind of walk through how they put together the presentation, the information and things, and how we might incorporate your process into a process that we could make more applicable to others going through the same thing. Same thing with you, Stephanie. Maybe we could have a meeting with both of these groups and then go through that, or one at a time, because there's probably a lot of information to cover. So I think that would be helpful. Okay, so those are my thoughts on next steps relative to getting a proposal for the process together. Anybody else have any other suggestions, or anyone else want to sit in on that discussion? If there's enough interest in it, we can go through the discussion during one of these calls. I just didn't want to include the whole group if there wasn't interest at that level.
That sounds reasonable. I was just going to say that we had a ton of help from Paulina and the team at Thesaurus Health, so we should include them because they really helped
definitely
structure it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then one thing I also kind of wanted us to noodle, and I mentioned this a little bit before, is how do we, for the work that you're doing, and again, I understand some things are proprietary and whatnot, but what can we do to encourage sharing of the documentation and ETLs that come from these processes? Like either linking them to the survey work group GitHub or forking things to the GitHub. Because one of the things I'd really like for this to do is become a resource so that people don't keep reinventing the wheel. Part of the goal as the community is to create things that are reusable or help us not reinvent the wheel. And then also, one of the purposes of the work group is so much of this work was being done in silos and was sort of defeating the purpose of OMOP, which is to be able to do network studies and pool data and things. So I think having more information available in the survey GitHub would be helpful for that. So I'm curious, does anybody have any suggestions? How do you feel about sharing your ETLs in some way in terms of maybe forking your repo or sharing links to your code and documentation and things like that?
I mean, that's our entire purpose, is to make everything available and publicly available. So all of our definitions, pseudocode, and ETLs would all end up posted on GitHub and made freely available through our project website and through the T1D data exchange. It's probably not super helpful unless you're one of the 67 organizations that's part of the T1D data exchange. But yeah, that's entirely our plan. And certainly we're funded to do so, which is nice. Mm-hmm. There's nothing proprietary in the concepts that we have. You could, if you want to incentivize it, it could be part of the approval processes. Some minimum level of public sharing is required. And if it's going to end up as part of the OMOP CDM and being used as part of this community, it's sort of, I don't know what proprietary things one might be doing, but not entirely sure that there's how that would pan out. So I don't know, it could be part of just, great, you're going to go through this process and you're going to request a custom vocabulary. It's going to be built out in the OMA data model. Great. Part of the approval process is there must also be a public repository of all of these tools.
I
Kind of
like
like
that.
NIH, right?
Yeah.
This is our version of it.
Yeah,
Our version of DMSP.
I like it. Yeah, and I also think it's just part of your commitment to being part of the community, right? You benefit from things the communities. It also makes sense that you contribute to the community too. So I'd like to think that's intrinsic, but I don't know that it always is. So, because we're doing the same, we're getting ready to make some of the Connect data public, and we're working on data use agreements and things like that. And, one of our things is you have to share your code. So, for any derived variables and things that you create so that other people can create the same things and we can compare apples to apples. So, I appreciate that. So, we're just about at time. So yeah, we'll maybe talk about the next meeting, where we are with demonstration efforts like yours, Piper. I'll have a little bit more knowing about where mine's going at that point and see if we'll be ready to share some of those out sort of as practice for the upcoming workshop at the end of August or beginning of September. But I think that's all I have. Thank you all so much for such a great discussion. This has been really productive and helpful, and I appreciate it. Anyone else have anything to add before we hop off? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
too.
you.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Bye, bye.